Hi there, Michael here. In today's video we're going to have another look at what is currently the best budget-friendly solution for monitoring immersive or spatial audio during production. I am of course talking about the combination of the Neumann NDH headphones, the Neumann Rime binaural rendering plugin and the Subaware head tracker for virtualizing the immersive 3D environment. If you are a regular viewer of this channel, you might be aware that I already did a video about Rime and its head tracking capabilities a while back. Back then, really my only concern was the fact that Neumann had implemented head tracking only horizontally, meaning that you could not properly monitor object placement above the listener position. Well, in a recent update, Neumann fixed that issue and included full three-dimensional head tracking. So I felt it was time to make another video and try to find out if this is really good enough to replace a real-life 7.1.4 Studio. And since we already added, I thought I would also add a quick review of the new update of the Walkmix Creator, a system that allows you to produce immersive audio in Sony's 360 Reality Audio format, because the Walkmix Creator also got a head tracking update that works natively with the Subaware head tracker. So without further ado, let's jump into Reaper for some immersive head tracking. I'm working on a Mac today and I've decided to work with Reaper, but everything that I'm going to show you should technically also work on Windows and pretty much any digital audio workstation that is capable of working with spatial audio or multi-channel audio. Now the session that I'm going to use is really simple. All I did is I used an instance of Dune and I'm just playing one of the basic presets or the factory presets. Let's just have a brief listen what we have here, because all we really need is we need to figure out if the placement of that sound in three-dimensional space is accurately represented by the Rime plugin and the Walkmix Creator. So that's really all that we need, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the Walkmix Creator. Now, I'm not going to go into the details about how the Walkmix Creator works. I actually did a video about that a while back. I'm going to leave a link in the description below. The basic principle is that you have one plugin that serves as the renderer, the immersive audio renderer, as well as the penner, the immersive audio penner. And you need to tell the system essentially which one is the renderer, and that's all you need to do. In that sense, the Walkmix Creator is a little bit different to most of the other immersive audio production systems because, once again, it only has one plugin. It also is a little bit different to Dolby Atmos in the way it is set up and in the way you actually use it. It's not that difficult to use, but once again, if you want to find out more, a link to a video is in the description below. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add an instance of the Walkmix Creator to the master track, and I've actually decided to turn the master track into a 12-channel track. Now we're going to need that later when we're going to work with the Rime plugin, because we need a 7.1.4 signal, so 12 channels. But for the moment being, this is really more of a preview of what we're going to need later. So let's just add a Walkmix Creator instance to our master track. And as soon as I do that, the plugin will actually tell me, is this the plugin that's sitting on the master track? And I say, yes, it is. And that's all I need to do there. And then we're going to add another instance to the track that holds the actual audio. And if we would have multiple tracks, obviously we would do that for every single track, but we only have one track here, so let's add that here. And the Walkmix Creator understands that this is now the penning plugin and gives me some general information about what's happening. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to simply pan the audio around a little so that we see what is actually happening. So let's switch over to the penner and play our audio. And in order to actually be able to hear what the Walkmix Creator is doing, I also need to enable the master output here. And I now see the audio coming in at channel 1 and 2. This is a left and right channel. And if I moved it around, I can now essentially position these signals in three-dimensional space. Now what I want to do is I want to actually kind of combine them. So I want to have left and right channel in one position simply because I want to clarify, I want to make clearer where exactly that audio is. So for that we need to disable the locking mechanism here, and then we can, oopsie, so let me just move that in here. So we have them now together, and then let's lock that again, and now we can essentially move left and right channel simultaneously. And that's really everything that we need to do. So let's do some head tracking. And for that, we need to set up the head tracking support. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare the Walkmix creator for taking in the head tracking signal, and a couple of things I need to make sure that I have set correctly. The first thing is I need to enable binaural rendering, and for that I go here into the post-processing section of the Walkmix creator. If you don't see that renderer here, just click on the Walkmix renderer, the image here, and that will open up the settings that you can select. Here we can change the speaker layout, and we're going to actually use that later when we're going to switch over to 7.1.4. But for what I want to do now is I want to simply enable binaural rendering, and for that I simply click here on the headphone icon, and that switches over into binaural rendering. So binaural rendering is now enabled. So the next thing I need to do is I need to enable the head tracking, and for that I go here into the settings. So by clicking here on this cogwheel, and in these settings, I now have one additional menu item. This is here adapters. So there are a couple of different things I can set, but for us really interesting now is here the adapter setting. And these are the adapters that you can use in order to drive the position of your head in the Walkmix creator. Currently, the Walkmix creator supports two adapters. The first one is the Subwoofer head tracker. This is the one we are going to use. And the second is the Odyssey Maxwell head tracker. So if you have Odyssey Maxwell headphones, you can use them here with the Walkmix creator, and it actually works quite well. Now, these are things that you need to install separately, and if you have not installed them yet, it will actually tell you that, and then you can simply download everything and install it. It's actually a fairly straightforward process, and once you have installed it, you can open up the window for the head tracker by clicking here on this icon. I'm going to do that for the Subwoofer head tracker. It's going to open up here in the background. And currently it tells me that the device is not found, and the reason the device is not found obviously is because I have not yet connected my head tracker. So let's do that next. Now, you might have noticed that I semi-permanently attached my head tracker to my Neumann headphones. This is because I really like to use this Subwoofer head tracker together with the Neumann headphones. The one thing I have not done is I have not yet connected the cable. So let's do that now. So the first thing is I need to connect here the micro USB connection. Unfortunately, it's micro USB. I would actually kind of prefer USB-C, but kind of it is what it is. So let's do this connection here. And then the next thing I need to do is I need to connect it to my computer. So let's connect the USB cable here. And as soon as I do that, you should actually see the change. So it's going to change from device not found to device disconnected. Why is it disconnected? Well, because I also need to enable it. So let's enable it here by clicking on this enable button. And as soon as I've done that, you see it is now connected. Now, this is going to be my main window if I want to reset the position of the head tracker. Sometimes, kind of these head trackers can drift, so you might need to reposition that. If that ever happens, you can simply click here and that will kind of recenter everything. And with that, I should already see the head being tracked in the Walkmix creator. So let's go back to our panning section here. And if I now look at the head, I see the head movement is being tracked in the Walkmix creator. And this is actually really, really cool. So let's play our audio to see how accurate that actually is. Now, I do need to point out that in this particular environment where I'm filming my videos, there's a lot of electronic interference because I just have so many devices here. So the head tracker has a tendency to drift a little more than it usually does. But you need to trust me that if I'm sitting in front of my laptop, for example, and I'm using this setup, there's almost no drift. So it actually is very, very accurate. But as you can see here in this particular environment, it already drifted a little. I was looking into that camera and it kind of drifted away. So let me just recenter that again. And then let's play our audio. Oops, recenter. Okay. And then let's play our audio and see how that actually works. So the audio is to my right, slightly above. So if I'm turning my head in that direction, you should actually hear that as a panning sensation, but for me it's actually almost as if that source or that audio would actually be above my head to the right. And that is actually really, really accurate. So let me just kind of turn that on the other side. So that actually works really, really well. Now, for whatever reason, sometimes it says that the master output setting is wrong. I'm not quite sure why it does that, but kind of it is what it is. If that ever happens to you, just kind of click that away and kind of enable processing again. The Walkmix creator, unfortunately, is a little less stable than I would like it to be, but kind of it is what it is. So far so good, but we actually wanted to look at the rhyme plugin, and for that we are going to simply extend our setup here in order to include the RAM plugin. So instead of doing the head tracking within the Walkmix Creator, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the signal, the audio, into a 7.1.4 audio, and then I'm going to add the RAM plugin and monitor that 7.1.4 audio with the RAM plugin. So let's do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to undo a couple of things here. But let me first close the Subaware head tracker window here, and then I'm going to go into the monitor settings, and I'm going to disable the Subaware head tracker here. And then I'm going to go into the post-processing option, because what I want to do is I want to actually now turn it into 7.1.4. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to once again switch back to the speaker layout settings. And for that, I'm going to go down to the 7.1.4. Now, the Walkmix Creator doesn't really have a 7.1.4 layout, but it has a 7.0.4 layout. This is what we're going to use. So let's switch that over to 7.0.4. And then I need to simply check if the mapping is actually correct. So let me go to the mapping here. So in the monitor section, if I go to mappings, I just need to make sure that the kind of correct speakers are actually going to the correct channel. So we have left, right, center. Then we don't really have an LFE. We have left surround, right surround, left rear surround, right rear surround, and then the top speakers, 2 in the front and 2 in the back. So this is correct. For whatever reason, sometimes it happens to me that it sets the mapping incorrectly, and then I need to correct that here. But that essentially means that now the Walkmix Creator is converting everything into 7.0.4, technically 7.1.4 without an LFE. So let's just play the audio to see if we're actually getting audio in 7.1.4 format. So let me go back into the panel maybe here. And as you can see here in the master track, I'm actually getting that. So if I'm moving that around. Now I'm not going to hear that in the headphones, obviously, because in the headphones I'm only hearing the left channel and the right channel and none of the other speakers. So let's now use the RAM plugin in order to turn that 7.1.4 back into binaural and use the head tracking within the RAM plugin. And for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the RAM plugin here after the Walkmix Creator. So let's add the RAM plugin. RAM, here we are. And once again, similar to the Walkmix Creator, I'm not going to actually go through all the details of the RAM plugin. This is an incredibly well-made plugin. I really like it a lot. There are a couple of options that you can set. You can choose what headphones you have, the NDH30 or the NDH20. I'm working with the NDH30 here. When you use the RAM plugin, also make sure that you set the settings for the head-related transfer function, so the intertemporal dimension parameter, the IDT parameter, or the interaural time difference, the interaural time difference parameter, in order to match your head size. In my particular case, I actually needed to increase that. I have a very large head, and much larger than most people. So even if you have somebody on a YouTube channel that says, I have a large head, mine is larger. So in order for me to actually hear that well, I needed to increase that to 105%. But that also means that the impression that I'm getting is not going to be very accurate for you. So just be aware, what you're going to hear now is my personalized settings with my personalized headphones. So whatever you're going to hear might work, might not work. The only way for you to really figure out if this works well for you is just to download the trial and just test it yourself. So let's close it again. And what we want to do is we want to actually take in a 7.1.4 signal. And that essentially is everything that I need to do. So let me just kind of play the audio. Now, I have not yet set up the head tracking because that is something that we need to set up separately. But we should at least hear the audio in the way it's supposed to be heard. So let me open up the Walkmix Creator again. Now, one thing that took me by surprise is the quality of the impression that you get if you have the signal behind you. And I'm not quite sure if that comes through on YouTube, probably not, but for me this is astonishingly good. I really get the impression that it's behind me. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I can set the ITT parameter, the interaural time difference parameter, which really kind of makes it very, very accurate. I can move that around. Now, one thing I also need to point out is because we have a 7.1.4 audio signal, if you move that to the bottom, you're not going to get a very, very good impression simply because 7.1.4 doesn't have any speakers from below. So even though you can actually move the position of the object below the listener in the Walkmix Creator, it's not going to give you a good impression here because we are listening in 7.1.4 and 7.1.4 simply does not have any speakers below the listener, right? So this is one of the disadvantages really of working with these types of formats. So let's move that up again. So we now want to add the head tracking with the Subaware head tracker, and for the Neumann Rime plugin, what we need to do is we need to use the Bridgehead application that comes with the Subaware head tracker and connect the Subaware head tracker to the Neumann Rime plugin via the OSC protocol. Now this adds a little bit of latency, but that latency is almost unnoticeable. So it's really very, very accurate and very, very fast. But just be aware of that. So there's an additional step here that we need to take. So instead of the direct integration that we had with the Walkmix Creator, here we have one additional application that we need to run. So let's do that. So let's open up the Bridgehead application. Where are we? Here we are, Bridgehead application. And well, that's behind me here. So here we have the Bridgehead application. And similar to what we had in the kind of with the Subaware window that we had in the Walkmix Creator. Now we now have this head here, and we can, if you double click that, we reset it. Now, if you have been working with the Subaware head tracker, be aware that Subaware recently updated their software, including the firmware for the head tracker. This is particularly important if you're working on a Mac, because there were some changes in the way Macs work with the MIDI protocol, and they had to change some of the functionality in the JUICE environment, so in the IDE, in the software development environment that the Subaware head tracker is developed in. So just be aware that you need to update that, and for that you can essentially go here into the head tracking settings, and you should be, where are we? No, here in the information settings, we can check for updates online, and that will tell you if you have the most recent version. Update that and you should be fine. Once you update that, the recommendation is also to do a calibration of the Subaware head tracker, and that's actually really, really simple to do. And you are good to go. So there's one final thing that we need to do, and you might have noticed that in my particular case, the plugin already identified that there's head tracking going on. So the Rime plugin already knows that I'm actually tracking the head here. But in order for that to make that work, you need to go into the OSC bridge settings, and you need to select the Neumann profile. Once again, I did a video about that a while back. I'm going to leave a link in the description below. But what you need to do is you need to send out YPR parameters through OSC, and that needs to be sent to the local port, obviously, the local host, and to port 7001. And that should then essentially work. And as soon as you do that, the head tracking will actually show that the status is green. So we are now receiving the head tracking signal, and everything is set up to be head tracked. So let me just once again click that again. Once again, a lot of interference here. I at some point need to figure out why that is. People tell me it shouldn't be, but for some reason there's something here that kind of interferes with my head tracker. Once again, if I'm in front of my laptop somewhere else, it actually works almost perfectly. But here I have quite a bit of interference. So let's play the audio again, and then let's see how the head tracking works. And so let's go back into the positioning here. Now, obviously, you're not going to see the head move now because we are not really tracking via the Walkmix Creator. We are now tracking via the Rime plugin. And if I move that back, I now have that in the back. If I move that to the right, I have that in the right. And essentially now I also, the Neumann Rime plugin also tracks the pitch. So if I'm now kind of shifting the pitch, so if I'm doing that, for example, I hear the signal here. And this is incredibly accurate. It's really, really accurate. If you have ever wondered how it is to work in a studio that is really kind of well tuned, this gives you a really, really good impression. So we're very, very close to an actual impression that you would get in the 7.1.4 music studio. A lot of people usually complain about head tracking has no function, head tracking is stupid, and you should get a real studio. And my answer to that is, if you really look at the latest innovations in this particular case, and I'm particularly speaking about Neumann RIME and the sub-woofer head tracker, the quality of the tracking is so good that you're really, really close to being getting the impression as if you would be in a real studio. Now, there's still one thing that kind of, I think, tricks the brain into thinking something is wrong because you feel that you have headphones on, and because you feel you have headphones on, your brain is telling you you can't really hear what's happening in the space. You're actually hearing what's in the headphones, but I think this is just something that the brain tells you to, and once you get beyond that, and really kind of allow yourself to be immersed in that experience, the quality of the positioning of these objects in three-dimensional spaces is super accurate. So if you've ever wondered, I wanted to work with immersive audio, 3D audio, but I can't because I don't have the space to build a Atmos Studio, 7.1.4 studio. I don't have the money to do that. This is an outstanding option. There's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be able to do everything that you would do in a traditional immersive studio here with this particular setup. And this setup is completely mobile. You can take that with you. You can go to a coffee shop and do your immersive mixing there. You can do that in a hotel room. And most importantly, it's significantly less expensive. Yes, the headphones are a bit expensive, so the Neumanns are not exactly the cheapest headphones, but all in all, it's kind of reasonable. And if you would buy the equipment that you need for a real Atmos Studio, a 7.1.4 Atmos Studio, just the audio interface alone would cost you 5 times as much as this particular setup complete. So yes, this is an outstanding option, and I'm really happy that Neumann decided to generalize the head tracking, because this now makes this a kind of a second to none binaural rendering solution with head tracking. So what's my opinion about this update? Well, as you might have guessed, I'm very excited about the updates that have been made to the head tracking capabilities of both the Walkmix Creator as well as the RIME plugin from Neumann. The addition of head tracking to the Walkmix Creator is very welcome, and the fact that there is virtually no setup required makes it very easy to use for anybody who has little to no experience in using head tracking during audio production. It integrates directly with the sub-woofer head tracker, which minimizes latency, and if you do not want to use a wired head tracker, you can also use it with the Odyssey Maxwell headphones directly, which is super convenient. On the downside, I did not get the same quality of spatial impression that I get with other head tracking approaches, but that could be just because I have a really large head and the fact that the standard HRTFs usually don't fit me well. For me, the real game changer is the expansion of the head tracking capabilities of the RIME plugin. If you own either the Neumann NDH20 or NDH30 headphones, the quality of the binaural rendering of the RIME plugin is simply second to none. Nobody else comes even close, in my opinion. And since the head tracking is now truly three-dimensional and not only horizontal, you can check the positioning of your sound objects in 3D space very accurately. Yes, it uses the Bridget application and takes in the tracking data via OSC, which adds a tiny bit of latency. But I have to be perfectly honest, if I had not known that because I work with these systems regularly, I would not have noticed that delay. It's really almost negligible. If you have been following my channel, you know that I recently visited Audio Brewers in their studio in Athens. This is one of the best immersive audio studios I've ever heard, and I can honestly tell you that with the combination of the Neumann headphones, the RIME plugin and the sub-woofer head tracker, you are 95% at that level. Yes, a real properly constructed and treated 7.1.4 studio is still preferable, obviously, but there's absolutely no reason why you should not be able to make this head tracking solution work. So if you're interested in 3D audio and shied away from it because you either don't have the space or the resources to build a proper 7.1.4 studio, the Neumann RIME sub-woofer combination is the way to go. It will definitely get you there. Well, that's everything for today. If you have any questions or comments, drop them in the comment section below or join a free Discord server. The invite link is in the description. And don't forget to subscribe and stay updated on all things Dolby Atmos and immersive audio. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.